All right. I believe that means we are live. And welcome to another Geek Book Club, the show what books geeks clubs read. We've been off the air for a little bit as I've been swamped with a bunch of ridiculous gadgety work, and my buddy Andrew just got a new job. So that's really
Woo!
exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting, but it's really busy. It's really busy times whenever you're in transition. So yeah, but I'm glad we're back. And you know what? We kind of needed some of this time for this book that we read.
It did kind of feel like both of us struggled a bit to get through this. This is always the danger of going back. So you had not read this book before, and I was
hmm
bringing it back up as just, hey, I remembered reading this book and I thought it was really fun. And that's always super dangerous because I can never tell, like, are my memories of this book so fond because of me when I read it, or was this really as good a book as I remember it being? And so I definitely had to wrestle with this one a little bit. Overall, very positive. Overall, great experience. But I feel like you and me will have some meat to chew into as the pros and cons of this prose.
Yes, like I've never had one of our books on the show where I've just dreaded getting through one chapter. Like it took me 2 weeks of on and off again going through one of these chapters for many reasons. So yeah, it's yeah. We should probably tell everyone what book we have actually been
I
we've
mean,
read.
it's in the title
It's
of
true. It's
the
true.
video.
Well,
And
and
our book club titles are not clever. So,
yeah.
but we are talking about Island in the Sea of Time, which is a part of an epic book series. There's a trilogy of books that are focused on this one science fiction event. And then there's like 20 other books that are peripherally related. Um, so yeah, we're only going to read one of them. I don't feel like we're going to make it a top priority to get through this entire like
Yeah.
20 book series.
See,
I don't know how you feel.
I'm more
I know you're a
interested.
completionist. I know you're like, I once I start something, I need every single page. And that's exactly what I need
I will say I was
to
more
enjoy.
interested in what I would do in this situation
Oh, totally.
for this.
Well,
So
I don't, I mean,
yeah.
I don't want to like. Let's get into some actual plottage. But Island in the Sea of
Yes.
Time by S.M. Stirling. This is the first book of the Nantucket series, written in the late '90s and starting. It's the action starts in the '90s, where the entire island of Nantucket is caught up in some very odd metaphysical event that sucks it through a wormhole and dumps it back to the year 1250 BC. So you just magically were transported 3000 years into the past. Then that's what would happen. And so it's the inhabitants of this island. It's the off season. I love that the
hmm
book starts us off by talking about the people who actually live on Nantucket, but aren't just, temporary visitors, filthy casuals. It was like
hmm
the people that actually live there in the off season get sucked all the way back, and then also a Coast Guard ship, a training
Right.
vessel, gets transported back. And then the book sort of evolves from there. How would you survive? A
hmm
winter is coming up. What do you do for fuel? How do you deal with electricity? All of your modern conveniences are gone. And then I love that this book actually does spend some time getting into some of the philosophical and religious concerns. Like, you've been
hmm
transported 1,250 years BC. Anything you do could potentially disrupt, say, the coming of the Messiah,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh man. So we get crazy cultists in this. We've got it's really fascinating, and it's something I love about these alternate history sort of novels and stories where it's you have to grapple with your own perception of what you view the world as, and like your own world as, and it's really interesting. I will say, going back in time, you definitely shouldn't be so trusting of people as you wouldn't be now. It's like I've watched enough Game of Thrones, and this is like medieval era. But that we'll get into some of that here in a little bit with some of my problems with it.
I knew it would be impossible for us to not reference the cultural zeitgeist. What is Game of Thrones?
Right.
I just was really surprised that we made it there in under 7 minutes. We haven't even made it to the actual like plot of this book yet, and like we were just tripping. So later on in the show, we'll also have our end game spoilers. It's gonna be
yes,
and
we'll have
a good time.
We'll have our pitch for the next Marvel film at the end of this. So yeah, but no, it's really interesting, and one thing that's really nice. So we should set up some of some of the characters. There's an old cop who I've forgotten his name, who is basically put in charge of Nantucket essentially, and they have to come up with. Well, essentially, its first priority is food. So he's taking care of that. We've got also Marion Alstein. I call her Captain McSamurai.
Captain McSamurai. Well,
yeah.
she's sort of like she's like a proto Michonne.
Yes,
the character from Walking Dead.
Though I will say, I imagined her as the ops officer. The actress who plays the ops officer in Star Trek Discovery.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah,
I imagined her portraying this character. So, but she's from the South, and it's funny too because so if you think of anybody going back in time that it would probably be not great for, it'd be
right
like an African American woman who's also lesbian. So. Yes. Yeah, it's a good thing she kicks so much ass in this. So.
Right, it's a good thing she's super handy with a sword. No, that's one of the things early on. So I know we're just doing our character breakdowns. This book is in and of itself a time capsule of the 90s because as these Nantucketers are trying to maintain some semblance of like civilization. They do have to go about what I love is that the book very, very efficiently, I shouldn't say quickly because it's a 600-page book and they spend some time building this stuff up, but the Nantucketers very efficiently move through this sort of grieving process where in the first 200 pages, they've already sort of accepted that this could be permanent. We have no idea if this is going to stay this way, if we're going to be stuck here forever, but we need to act as if we'll never be rescued and that we'll just have to put down roots here. And so they start doing things like building a government. They've got the blueprint of the United States of America to kind of base a representative government off of, but there is no United States. And so now they need to look at what's a modern interpretation of the laws that were written, the Constitution that was written, the Bill of Rights that was written, that's going to apply to our predicament in the here and now. And it's hilarious. It's heartwarmingly hilarious that the book takes great pains to do things like, one of the major characters here and the highest ranking officer of the Coast Guard is homosexual. So we should codify into our Constitution that we support the rights of homosexuals, including the right to marry, and that there's the clutching of pearls and the breathing through teeth. I don't know. Because that was totally a part of that conversation in the 90s. That the book is super progressive for the 90s, but feels a little quaint for some of those topics.
Yes. Well, one of the major things you change for a decade or 2 decades later would be, people complaining that the kids complaining they didn't have their phones or, anymore. They had some mentions of the internet, but it wasn't so full. And it's really convenient. So one thing also about Captain McSamurai Pants is Marion Alstein. She also runs her square-rigged schooner. Well, it's not. Is it technically a schooner? Whatever. Their sailing vessel. They had the Eagle. She runs it very much in the old style and making sure that everyone knows how to. It's very convenient that's how she runs it. Yeah, but it really helps them, and so it's my favorite parts of the book are probably this first half of the book where they're basically Mark Watneying their whole situation in terms of having to MacGyver stuff together to survive and solve one problem after the other, which is great. That's probably my favorite part of the book, to be honest.
Okay, I'm really glad you said that, because I kind of felt like this could have been two separate books.
Agreed.
In that, like that the recovery and the exploration of their predicament and the rebuilding of their community made for a really compelling read all on its own. And I felt as the book transitioned from survival to exploration that we lose a little of the focus. I think it's around that halfway point when other human cultures are encountered that the book starts to struggle with some focus. Like
agreed.
Because if I'm going to criticize anything in the first half of this book, the only thing that I think is maybe a touch unrealistic is how efficiently all of the people on Nantucket accept their fate, work towards a common good, start working together, rebuilding parts of their society, and getting to a place where they can like feed, clothe, and sustain themselves. Everything felt like there wasn't quite enough peril there, because
like
everyone was sort of on the same page. And I can't remember the name of the sheriff now, but he kind of rallies all of the humans and they all sort of work towards that common good. And I like that the book is taking humanity at its best. It's a very sort of Roddenberry utopian human that is placed in this situation. But I felt like there probably would have been more pushback from some of the different communities on this island, or just differing opinions on, well, you think we should focus on this farming and I think we should focus on this whaling. And there would have been like a more, political fight between people of different backgrounds.
Agreed. And by the way, the police chief was Jared Coughlin. Yes. And he was very much the or who is it, him? Or there were so many lines in this book where you had the stereotypical Nantucket, yeah. Like well, imagining holding a long pipe. Yeah. Like so many times in this book they had that. So, but yes, definitely I agree that it should have been split. And the one thing I think would have been like to drive tension, say the first time they had a group going out to do whaling. This kind of happened where they'd say, okay, we're going to send a group to go do this and, go and gather sugar from, like they sent this group down there. They just kind of go down there and then they're back off camera per se. And it's like just kind of gets done without being the story being told. Like I would love to have had a sequence where they're doing their first time having to whale with these oceans that are just full of life because they've not been hunted as much. And you could have a thing where like somebody gets killed or injured during that process. And it's just basic
super survival. Dangerous. Like, these people don't know what they're doing at all. So it's not that I really felt like in this one book, in telling the story that SM Stirling is trying to achieve, because it's a pretty grand vision. But that's why I kind of feel like there could have been more drama in those moments. The closest that I think we get in that initial exploration is when they travel westward. They go from Nantucket just to the mainland to kind of get the lay of what's happening there. They've got just a little bit of fuel left in an airplane that they can go and zip around and see just for a couple little expeditions. And they encounter their first natives, the native populations there. And that the book actually takes some time to kind of walk us through, like, oh, just the fact that they've encountered these Nantucketers is basically the death of major chunks of this population. Like, not only just in immune system stuff, but like, the shock of this culture shock is one thing, but you encountered this person. There's no way for us to even dump enough antibiotics into this individual to stop them from completely dying.
Yeah, that was really interesting how they handled that, and they also kind of used this initial encounter to kind of show the percentage, show basically the percentage of the population will be like a certain percentage will be freaked out, like out of like 4, 2 will be freaked out and run, 1 will be kind of like, oh, I might be kind of friendly, and then the other one will be just freaking crazy, try to murder you. You know,
And I
so
loved that was their showdown. Like most of
yeah,
the village runs, a few people hide, one person just goes running right into shotgun blast.
yeah, ah, yeah,
Leroy
yeah,
Jenkins.
pretty much. And that's pretty much true through most of every civilization they encounter, almost. Uh,
So here's
yeah,
where I'm going to do that thing that's probably going to read as a little bit annoying, but I do kind of feel that there is a Eurocentric focus on the various populations of humanity that we encounter, because the
yeah.
populations of natives in the Americas are handled in a very sort of noble, savage,
Well, not
you know.
even.
Well,
It's like
we'll get to that. Oh, you I'm gonna be there. There's more to
certain
talk about there.
peoples.
But they also take an expedition to the British Isles, and the humans that they encounter from 1250 BC are radically more sophisticated and advanced. And I just in terms of how these different peoples are portrayed, um, I feel like you encounter Europeans from 1250 BC, they have a much more diverse concept of travel and trade than the peoples in the Americas did. But I still don't think that you wouldn't be like a walking plague engine. But
Yeah.
Europeans don't face that as a problem. They're all sort of just fine mingling with the people from Nantucket from the 1990s. And that I felt was sort of one of those very convenient differences between
Hmm.
the depictions of European versus American.
Well, and yeah, it was interesting. One, like all the different groups of people that they encounter, major population groups. There are the non-centralized, like North American natives that they encounter at the beginning. There are the Olmecs of
Mhm.
Central America. There's the Earth people that they kind of have to name these because there's no names for these people, from back then. But it's basically the people who built Stonehenge
Right.
versus the invaders who destroyed them. And then the Tartessians, which are from the southern part of I've got it here. They're
More Mediterranean. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, they're basically just north of, like, Tartessos is just north of Gibraltar. And they're traders who are very cutthroat, and you don't generally want to have around, which is the big problem I had with this book.
No, no,
so,
everything was fine.
so
So no, so they in trying to rebuild and or trying to build. I shouldn't keep saying rebuild. That's the funky thing about like time travel is they actually aren't trying to get back to
mhm.
1990s life. And I again I have to respect SM Stirling for putting these characters in this moment, in this time, and forcing them to come to these types of decisions where they have to build something new. And so they get to have some fun conversation. I wish that we had had more time to spend with some of the fun conversations about like, well, what are we going to do about our energy policy, and how are we going to deal with pollution? And we get little hints of it, and there's always this backdrop in Nantucket of them trying to build like a city council that will then become sort of a national government.
Mhm.
But while they're going through this, they know like we need supplies and we also need like livestock, and there should be civilization over in the British Isles that hopefully we can communicate and trade with. And
And,
so they go sailing their Coast Guard clipper. Is it a clipper? Is that what we
um,
would call it? I don't know my
yeah,
boats. You know boats better than me.
yeah, I need to go back. It's and look at. We'll just call for this discussion. We'll call it a clipper. And if any of y'all want to, if you yell at us in the comments, you could yell
I
straight at
don't think
his
anyone's read this book, which is totally fine.
face.
But they go sailing across the Atlantic. Again, very drama free. Apparently, it was a totally chill sailing jaunt across the Atlantic, and they encounter the this violent tribe of what would you say, more of a patriarchal society of more conquest driven individuals that
Mm,
they are then also able to communicate with a trader from the Mediterranean, and that's how they begin this sort of effect. Now like any pretense is gone. They have changed prehistory. So there really isn't, I mean, if they continue on this course, the future that they come from, or the present that they come from, will just never have existed.
By the way, so it turns out it's a cutter.
Oh,
And it's a cutter. Interesting thing too about this is it's an actual vessel. It's a real vessel, training
right
vessel.
on.
Yeah, it's an actual Coast Guard training vessel that was built by Germany during World War II, and it's really quite fascinating. It's larger than most other sailing vessels. It's a 3-masted cutter. So yeah, that's really interesting. I love those. Those are some of the things I love about this, is that the author is really good about getting those little details in, and you really feel like you have a feel for Nantucket. You know, even though I've never been there and I've seen it on Google Earth. You know. But yeah, it's great. And so when they go over there and they're getting grain is another big thing they were getting from England.
That's right.
That was grain was the big thing that they couldn't get. And they encounter they essentially come and encounter the invading army, the invading Earth. No,
The
Sun Peoples. Yeah, the Sun People, and then also the Tartessians, who are traders of ill repute. The BC.
Well, at the time, in this point of the book, they're just merchants. We don't know that they might have.
They just might look slightly resemble Ferengi, and
Wow.
And so, right,
Wow, you just
I'm going right there. Well, and so they bring them back. They get a slave girl who turns out to be like essentially an important ranking member of the Earth People, who are basically the Stonehenge builders.
Yeah, it's alluded to that the Earth People are an oral history traditional people that are likely the distant relatives of whoever built Stonehenge, and there's that sort of notion of astronomy and spiritualism kind of coming together. And so the book actually has an early scene where a Sun People tribe of warriors are decimating an Earth People village, and they capture someone who would be sort of like a princess of one of these tribes. And they basically enslave her. But when the Eagle People from Nantucket, because the ship is the Eagle, they become the Eagle People, communicating with the Sun People. The Sun People give this. Her name is Swindapa. This sort of Earth person princess as part of a prize, because they're just tremendously impressed with a few of the trinkets that we're able to trade, that the Nantucketers are able to trade for grain and livestock.
Yeah, like plastic fake jewels.
Right, just like plastic. But didn't they also give like one was like just an iron sword, because we're firmly
because they were using bronze, and so it was a steel sword, I think.
Steel, that's right.
Yeah, it was steel, and the problem was they grossly underestimated how valuable the stuff they were bringing was, and so basically they painted a big.
That's a huge evolutionary leap in terms of mechanical advantage.
Oh yeah, and so basically painted a big target on themselves to be taken advantage of in their naive state. Which, oh my god, okay, I'm gonna be honest. Okay, right now. I'm going to just say it.
Do it. Just tear off the Band-Aid.
Everyone in Nantucket, all the protagonists are naive as hell throughout most of this book. And it drives me crazy.
No, Andrew, they're just trying to see the best in people.
Like, okay.
They're so hopeful and optimistic.
Oh my god. Well, I like Captain McSamurai Pants a lot whenever she throws that.
I thought she was that I mean, as a pragmatist, yeah.
Yeah, though she did make the mistake. So they bring back a Tartessian with them so they could learn languages. Well, that was the biggest mistake, because she even admitted that it would be a risk to bring him because he could bring others.
Right.
And the whole time I'm just thinking, oh my god, okay, learn what you need from him, then throw him overboard. Learn what you need from him, then throw him overboard. Man, you cannot afford for him to bring back these people to Nantucket. It's too much. I mean, Game of Thrones comes back around.
Well, the thing I'll give SM Stirling here is all of the protagonists from Nantucket are, again, it's this like aching acceptance. It feels so late 90s, doesn't it? You know, and like we're all coming together and we're all working towards a common good, and you know, the PC movement and everything that we might want to affix on that. But he does have a handful of Coast Guard and Nantucket characters that do try to work against what the main body of the Nantucket community is trying to do. And so the main antagonist is a character named Walker, who was the second in command on the Eagle, and is portrayed as a young, hot-headed, but very capable and a very powerful sailor. And so he decides that I am going to live in this time. I'm going to get all the benefits of living in this time, while bringing all of this sort of modern strategy and modern technology. So he's all about, like, this is a time of raping and pillaging, and I would like to do more raping and pillaging. And so he splits from the Nantucket forces to try and create his own little kingdom across the Atlantic.
Well, and during this time, he also there's a group of Nantucketers who are a small group who are also they're so naive to a point of almost comedy if it wasn't so tragic for them, where he convinces them that he wants to help the Native Americans, prevent them from being wiped out by later by Europeans. And so he fools them into basically capturing one of our protagonists and then taking them down to Central America with basically no plan. No plan at all. Nope. And he's like, oh, well, they're worshiping a bunch of jaguars. Well, they're screwed, good luck with that, suckers, and then we kind of stumble into the other portrayal of the Olmecs, who are the precursors to the Incas, the Mayans, the Aztecs. And
again, it's just like I did not do a lot of research on the Olmecs to prepare for this podcast, but it is a fascinating little bit of American history, where there's this whole crazy advanced civilization that probably faced some kind of volcanic or rapid climate shift and then just vanished. And they're the proto-civilization for what would come after the Aztecs and the Incas. But we don't really know anything about them aside from their artistic work and their pottery.
Right. Well, there are a couple of different things about them that are interesting and mysterious. Like what they're most known for. They're the giant stone heads that they made. They have these big helmets on them, and we don't really know what the significance of the helmets or the heads were really at all. There's now in the book, the Olmecs are basically cannibalistic quasi savages.
So this is what I mean. We get the fun of exploring what a disappeared culture would be like if they were the culture that created Stonehenge, and we get this brilliant, mathematically inclined, tracking the stars, astronomy, spiritual, again, very Western civilization kind of portrayal with the Earth people. And then we get to the Olmecs, and it's this incredibly sophisticated culture of building monuments and art. And again, you have to have a very advanced sense of mathematics to build these types of structures, to build pyramids, things like that. But like, oh no, these savages are going to tie women to tree stumps and have animals rape them. And that's what they worship as their gods. Oh yeah,
and then eat the rest of the crew otherwise. And then of course they have that moment where the Nantucketers come to rescue them, and they have like their own armor that they built in Nantucket. So it's kind of like the conquistadors, which is ironic, and it's so ironic for this whole thing for why they came. So it's.
So like, I'm not saying that I think it's the portrayal needed to be like, oh, well, that the peoples in the Americas were going to be just as advanced as, the populations and the more traveled populations in Europe. But I kind of feel like they could have been a little bit more advanced than this, because then later on in the book, there are other encounters with the northern Native American populations that are, again, they're radically more sophisticated than the portrayal of the
Oh yeah.
Olmecs
I'm going to
throughout
be
this
honest.
book.
Another thing too, I actually went and looked it up, and there's really no direct evidence to show that the Olmecs were cannibals at all. Not
Again,
to say
I
the
know.
ritual sacrifice wasn't a thing, but
Well, I'm sure it probably was. I mean, if we look
right.
to the early history of the Aztecs and the
Mm-hmm.
Incans, then I would imagine why. It's just for as much fun as the author has in sort of exploring the what if, or what would these peoples have been like, I do feel like there is that little bit of shall we say, author bias as to what
Yes.
the sophistication of a European community might resemble versus, again, that sort of tried and true staple trope of noble savages and
Mm-hmm. Well, and then of course they had them coming in as the conquistadors.
yeah.
And so it's interesting. So
I think again, I think that's on the nose. Like I think
it
that's
is.
obvious. Like
Well, it
they're
worked
playing
though,
with
and
it
it
does.
worked. That's the whole thing too. Is like, well, they're like, shit. Sorry, they're like, crap. We're being the conquistadors. Well, essentially, they're like, yeah, but it works. And it's interesting too. Just like how I viewed this whole thing, because essentially they have to basically fight the Olmecs to get their people back. And there's this wonderful section where, like, there thousands of these Olmecs are charging them, and then it turns out they have laid down call traps between them, and it just it disorganizes them. Well, it's interesting seeing this, because it's basically, I view this whole section as kind of like the superhero origin story, where
Mhm.
they've gotten their powers, and they're able to kind of use it, but they're a little clumsy with it, kind of
Oh,
kind of
totally.
like that scene from The Rocketeer, where he rescues the guy in the plane at the flying
Right.
circus. It's like that for this,
It's
because
like
it's
we
them
have
getting off their training
technology.
wheels.
Yeah, we have technology that is almost like magic to these peoples, when we're really just talking about things like plate armor and military tactics that just haven't been invented yet. But it is such a substantial advantage. But you have a whole crew of young trainee Coast Guard sailors, and you have a
Right.
handful of Nantucketers. You don't have a well-honed, trained military force. So again, those details are really what carry you through this book.
Mm-hmm.
Is from some of these major set pieces, I feel you have a just a few too many convenient dumb plot moments. I need this character to be blissfully ignorant or idealistically naive just to
Yeah.
further the plot for this next major section. But then once you get into that section, you've got all of these wonderful little details. The action is phenomenally written. Again, I
Agreed.
think that's like taking it back to where we talked about before, the Killer Angels, where you have a granular sense of what the conflict is, where the characters are, what they're facing, how they're facing it. And that's one of the joys of reading through this book. It's just the transitions from those major set pieces feel just a bit clumsy or just a little too convenient to get you through to that next set piece. And that's why I kind of feel like the this first book, again, being the armchair quarterback, um, only ever having written a book about smartphone photography, um, were I to have counseled SM Stirling, I would have said maybe spend more time on just the recovery, make that like a 400-page novel where we can really dig into the drama and the danger of just losing our safety net and our modern conveniences, and then sow the seeds for the exploration, the decimation of the native populations, and how we'll eventually become a sort of a merchant or a trading economy with the populations in Europe. That to me, I feel like we could have we could have satisfied the first part of that better without forcing some convenient or some, I mean, I guess it's a little sloppy, some sloppy conflict for the second half of the book.
And I'm going to be honest. The final battle in the book, I reached a point with the action where it was like the end of a Marvel movie where they have a giant CG action scene. I just kind of turned my brain off
Oh,
during.
that's a shame.
I know. I
So
know.
the big so we I'm kind of getting the sense, especially from people in the live chat here, if you're concerned about spoilers for a book written in the 90s, now's the point where we'll be getting into spoilers.
Yes.
So if you don't want the sort of the build, major aspects, because we can't cover everything, but if you don't want major aspects of Island in the Sea of Time to be wrecked, we're gonna jump into them now. Now would be the time to turn us off. Go read this 600-page book and then come back to the last half hour of our conversation here.
Yeah, it was. I don't know.
Let's set the stage. How do we get to a massive showdown in the British Isles? Because we are just now seeing Nantucket get on their feet. They've had a successful military encounter with the Olmecs to rescue some of their captured explorers. And just when we think that life in Nantucket is going to find some sort of happy balance, Walker decides that that's the time that he's going to form a little insurrection party and leave with a small crew of his own officers, and that they're going to go and set up their own kingdom with the Sun people in the British Isles.
Well, and he actually left at the same time as the group that went south. That's how he got them to follow them. That's right.
His diversion was a bunch of people who wanted to arm the Native Americans with modern technology.
Right.
That again, they didn't have a plan for it. They couldn't communicate with any of the native populations. No one speaks Olmec, so that's a problem.
You're right.
But at the same time, he takes one of their boats and then kidnaps one of the chief engineers. He's the
their chief blacksmith,
metal worker. Yeah, blacksmith. And so he takes the blacksmith, kidnaps the blacksmith, and then heads out to Britain.
Yeah, and he basically goes to basically recruit an army, because his ultimate goal is to take over Greece, essentially. So he's going to the Sun people and essentially trying to buy his way into organizing them into the semblance of a modern-esque band.
Well, the thing I like about Walker is that he's not really too concerned about bringing civilization to the savages.
Right, no, but tactics.
Tactics, yes, absolutely. So he cares about having a formidable military force, but he's pretty much down for everything else.
And he recruits this crazy doctor who is like a crazy S&M sadomasochist who's now just like torturing people and castrating people,
and she really likes it.
It's totally that's another thing too, is there were a couple of moments in this book where, like, in the initial rape at the beginning, and a couple of scenes with her that I feel like I was like, okay, you don't need to go into as much detail. You could back off a little, but they were going for the edgy nature of it, because also you get kind of slapped in the face with the brutal nature halfway through this book of the reality of where they are and what time they're in.
I actually did kind of like that because of how safe Nantucket felt. That the rest of the world did need to have just a bit more savage or a bit more brutality, an edge to it that sort of highlighted how dangerous it was for them to leave their little resort vacation island. So I liked that. I kind of liked that Walker leaned into it, that Walker enjoyed it, that's how he was wired to want things and station and celebrity, and everyone thinks he's this undefeatable wizard because he knows like basic martial arts.
Right. And it's interesting too, because his name, he has a cult of personality, and his name even gets twisted by the native tongue where it's like Hualcar,
Pals.
yeah, or
Yeah.
something. Yeah, it's. I love those little bits. There's, I guess one thing. And one thing I would kind of like to get into, and we could probably say this a little bit towards the latter part after we get through the whole story, but I'd like to know, and I want your thoughts of it here on who you would contact first if you were in this situation instead.
Man, that's tough. So
Like,
I mean,
say you have enough food already. You already
okay.
like food is not as much of an issue. It's more diplomatic and to get non-essentials and for
This is
what
so
reasons?
this is what's so funny is like if there was a way to keep a tiny little island like Nantucket somewhat self-sustainable, I would advocate for being Atlantis. It's like
Oh,
I have enough Star Trek, like Prime Directive, don't mess with, you know, pre-warp civilizations. I would say you try and have as minimal an impact as possible. You look at what areas of North America you can travel to for resources that will have minimal impact on the native populations. And then you build up and you fortify, because eventually you'll be found. But when you're found, you want to make sure that you are as defensible and as unreachable as possible, because I
yeah.
do not believe I viscerally disagree with the premise that the immune systems of North American native peoples is instantly decimated. I mean,
Yeah.
it's later. This is part of a 3-book trilogy. Just the Nantucket books are 3 books on their own, and it's basically like 90% of life, a human life on North America, is just wiped out because of disease. I I completely disagree with the notion that European populations wouldn't be similarly affected. Not as viscerally affected, but
Right.
similarly affected in the
Or
same way.
how about the other way around with so say what about some of the younger generation who might not have had a polio vaccine?
Oh yeah. No,
You know?
I
And
it,
that and
it
the other way around too goes, where you're exposed to all these other kinds of diseases that aren't so common anymore that we might not get vaccines for. Well, like that are not as high a priority as they were when they were first introduced.
right.
And
I think again that could have been something that the book, because I've read all 3 of these. I do not remember. I mean, I remember just sort of the overarching structure and what happens. I don't remember if the books ever deal with that. But I think after this first book, if I remember correctly, disease is just sort of like, NBD.
oh, okay.
Like it doesn't become a driving part of the plot. It's not like you have like this quest to reinvent penicillin or something like that.
Oh.
It's sort of less precious, and there's less drama surrounding that. And it becomes more a military exploration and conquest book, where you start having these, like, there's going to be a campaign through Egypt and in northern Africa, and it starts to like mirror Rommel, like in
Oh,
terms of military tactics and stuff.
interesting.
SM Stirling's strong suits really are get us to that next set piece, define the parameters of the battle, understand the technological differences between the 2 opposing forces, and
Mhm.
then let's get cranking. And that I enjoy. That I think is really well done. I can totally appreciate where you're coming though, where Walker is such a slippery eel, and he's got all of these like exit strategies and these shenanigans and these blueprints and these machinations, that it takes a while, because there's like a musical montage at around 400 pages that Walker has the time to influence the Sun People, build up his own military force, join several of the Sun People tribes, because
Mhm.
these are tribal communities. So it's
Right.
not like there is a Sun person government. It's
Right.
that they all fight each other, and there's sort of a king of the hill mentality. So he has to go and conquest through the Sun People just to get to a place where he can coordinate all of the Sun People to go and attack the Earth People. And then the book then has to take its time, where the Nantucketers can set up and establish a relationship with the Earth people
They're like,
and
let's
build up
get
their
down.
forces.
Yeah, I just had like the Mulan like training montage.
We'll make a man out of you.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
So again, like all of this has to take place, but it all takes place in the last 200 pages of the book in a way that feels a bit abbreviated, because really what we're building towards is the final showdown where Marion has to face off against Walker, where Swindapa can revenge herself against the Sun people that kidnapped and raped her, and where the Earth people can join a military force to push back against the Sun people who are decimating their lands and would have been responsible for eradicating their civilization. That's a lot. All at the same time, Walker is introducing, advanced metallurgy and military tactics and, advanced martial arts. And the Nantucketers are trying to relearn older technologies like whale oil lamps. And what do we do with all these guns that we've got when we don't have gunpowder, and the ability to make new shells and cartridges. So there's so much fun to be had in the exploration of those individual topics that I still enjoyed this book. I still thought it was fun. I did not have as much fun with it today as I remembered having. I want to say I read this in 99, 2000. I was probably about 20. I had way more fun with the book then. This book is absolutely a product of its time, that late 90s adventure science fiction kind of romp.
Agreed. And it's interesting. Like I hinted at earlier where I had a lot, like 2 weeks trying to get through one chapter, and it was the Mutiny chapter where like that
it's
was
super frustrating.
It was so frustrating. On basically every page was awful for me to get through, because it was just like it seemed kind of obvious, like and naive, that they were just letting Esketerol and Walker had even shown signs of being kind of wanting to twitchy and doing his own. Yeah. And they were just like, oh, whatever.
Well, we can't deal with that right now. We've got to worry about the harvest.
Oh my god. Yeah.
So we have a couple comments in the live chat here before we kind of get to finishing this off. Aditya Anil, my professors mentioned that the most advanced survival instinct present in modern Homo sapiens is adaptability. A lack of this could be what killed our more scientifically advanced ancestors. And I think that's a very good take on what might have happened to, say, the Earth people and the Olmecs. Is we have this notion. I mean, again, there are little hints of that, like with the fall of Rome. You build up a civilization, you build up a way that you get through daily life, and then you're presented with some kind of change. And sometimes that entrenched civilization, which was this huge benefit for when things were going well, now when conditions change around you, makes it like phenomenally more likely that you're going to crater. Like the bottom is going to fall out, and that your civilization is going to disappear. And then from Philip Morales, have any of you guys checked out the Earth Catastrophe cycle? It explains why every religion talks about floods. We only know of societies as old as 6,000 years, when humans have been around for ages longer. And that's why I really love getting into some of the side science, some of the side exploration of Egypt, where there is some evidence to point to these monuments and the Sphinx being far older than we thought they were. And again, it's like I still am enough of a traditional scientist at heart that I would want to see good evidence to support these hypotheses, but the hypotheses are so much fun.
Right. Well, and here's an interesting thing about
the mystery is so tantalizing. It's so tasty.
Right. Well, and here's an interesting thing about Egypt, and that's one thing that I would love to see in the next books, are them going to Egypt, because they kind of hinted at that a little bit. And the thing about ancient Egypt, in pre-dynastic Egypt, well, for most of Egypt's history, they basically didn't change a whole heck of a lot. Like they're for thousands of years, well, for hundreds of years, they didn't really change. And so it's like, it hasn't been till now, like okay, if you had a somebody from, say, the 1600s have an army, like if you took a commander from like from, say, late Middle Ages, a general, and you gave him an ancient Egyptian army, he could probably really kind of figure it out and use it, as opposed to a modern general today, in that you can't really. It's because our rate of change has exponentially grown since
well, and conflict
within the
has
last
caused a much more rapid adaptation.
Yes. Right. Yeah. And so it's really interesting seeing how far back that goes, and how slow change was and has been traditionally in the development of human civilization. So it's like, there, as he said about how human life stretches farther back. Well, we probably didn't have like good record keeping for most of our time evolving. So
Well,
it's
and that's
interesting
also,
seeing that, and why nothing's left behind.
and that's why I loved, like, in one of the early encounters where the Nantucketers are trying to build up their forces, build up their relationship with the Earth people. They have a woman who is studying astronomy. That they had like a little astronomy center on the island of Nantucket, and they bring her along just because they know through Swindapa that they're spiritually motivated by tracking the stars. And so just the fact that they bring like paper and books to the table, like
Right.
she pulls out like a star chart and she starts going over it, and you're like, oh, you can talk about the stars without waiting till nighttime to look at the stars, and you can pass that information on to your progeny without making them memorize hundreds of years of oral history. And that
Right.
she Swindapa regales them with tales of the library. And you're like,
Right.
okay, that's such a fun detail to sort of incorporate into the strategy of allying themselves with these populations.
One thing that there's one little section and one little moment that I really enjoyed in this, when this was later on, when we go back, when Sundapa brings the Nantucketers to the Earth people, and they have their reunion and celebration, and Sundapa finds herself uncomfortable and can't just take joy in the moment like her people do, and it's because she's realized that the Nantucketers, the Eagle people, are always looking forward, always, and so they can't just enjoy the moment because they're always looking forward, and now she's looking at herself that is that way, and she can't go home again. She is changed fundamentally as a person, and
that she describes this as being some sort of like mind illness,
right,
that she doesn't enjoy, that this is what her new reality looks like, just from having encountered how the Eagle people are completely not content with being in that moment, and they're always trying to plan ahead for something else. Those moments, again, I like those character building moments, I think are very, very well done. I just keep kind of coming back to this notion that there are a few just major constructs that have to happen because plot. When he does such a beautiful job, S.M. Stirling does such an amazing job of writing you through individual character moments, historical moments, battle details. I mean, I know I'm kind of harping on this, but it does take some of the enjoyment out of this. It makes the book a more challenging read to get through a couple small passages, when huge sections of the book I was chewing through voraciously, just like getting to the next piece, and then you kind of like hit the brakes on, but why is a character doing that? Or why are they taking that for granted? Why, out of everything that's going on, would they just accept this person's statement at face value? Why aren't they investigating? And then that you get a couple pages further, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that needed to happen just so that this thing could explode, and now they have to go and fix this other problem. All right.
yeah,
I guess I get that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I will say there were a couple of other moments that I enjoyed as well. Like I enjoyed the surprise attack of the machine gun Bastila.
Well, like let's because this is what SM Stirling does well. Again, like I mentioned before, Walker has been building up this Sun People force, and he's been introducing advanced metalwork to these populations. And the Nantucketers can't just make gun cartridges for rifles, but it's not to say that they didn't come up with fun new implements of weaponized destruction.
Yes, and it's really interesting, and it's also interesting to show like back in that time,
Well,
like
describe
armies.
what the weapon is. I set you up, Andrew.
Oh yeah, well it's like
Like the people watching haven't even read the
essentially
book.
essentially it's like the mechanics. It's like it's a thrower of spears that will essentially it's like those big the mechanics of it's basically a clockwork running spear thrower that you can
Steam engine.
Steam engine. Oh, it's a steam engine one. Okay, cool. Because that was one part where I was getting a little hazy on whether it was hand cranked or if it was steam. But yeah, it's a steam engine, and of course, it's going to screw with anyone that they've got it pointed at from this time. So it was, and the way they did it was the way they introduced it was great because you just thought they're essentially the antagonists were coming to take on to come and attack the Eagle when there's a skeleton crew aboard, and they just get surprised by the ultimate badass weapon for the protagonist, and it's great, and that was pretty satisfying because that was kind of the culmination of the ingenuity aspect of Nantucket for the second half of the book. I feel like,
and I have to give SM Stirling mad props that for writing this book a decade before the invention of Reddit, that he correctly motivated Walker to build trebuchets as the superior siege weapon.
Yes. Yes. Oh, man.
None of these dinky catapults, thank you. Oh no, we're going trebuchet.
Yeah, he skipped a level with it. Yeah. He started in the classical era basically of Civ.
Yes.
So
exactly.
Basically. But yeah, it's exciting. I will say once we got to like the Nantucketers got back to England and we're kind of assembling the army, I was like, oh, they're not going to kill Walker at the end of this book.
Mm-hmm.
God damn it. So
that's the completion of this story, is that Walker has to be a bit more of the mustache twirling melodrama villain, where he's too smart and too slippery and too good, and he's got an exit strategy, and he can cut and run whenever he feels like it. And so the Nantucketers have this climactic showdown, the Nantucketers with the Earth people versus Walker with the Sun people. And I really did enjoy the depiction of the differing states of technology and training.
See, the training side, I did like that. The setup for it, I liked a lot. I just found the actual battle would get a little hectic. I liked that when in the battle writing where they focused on one or two characters. Instead of telling the broad swaths of everything.
Well, because there's this little early skirmish where the Nantucketers sort of realize, like you're talking about the hero story, the Rocketeer has to save a guy from a plane and he's really clumsy, but at the end of the movie, he's way more capable. And so the Nantucketers have this little skirmish against some of the Sun People, a small tribe of the Sun People. And that's one of the things that helps sell the Earth tribes on joining forces, is this smaller force against this smaller tribe. It's a pretty one-sided fight. So even though the Sun People have been getting some updated weapons, they're still very barbaric, very loosely organized. They're not very well trained. And now that the Nantucketers have faced off against the Olmecs,
right?
They have a little bit more experience under their belt and are very much more effective in fighting barbarian hordes.
Right. I mean, it's not. Yeah, not every barbarian horde can be led by Kevin Sorbo. So, yeah. But
And
Yeah,
again, late 90s, it would have been Kevin
exactly.
Sorbo.
It was like
It totally
perfect.
would have been Kevin Sorbo.
Cold Conqueror is coming up, Oh man, but yeah, overall it was very satisfying. It's just I think its pacing suffered. It was inconsistent through the book a little bit, and I I feel like he should have taken his time and split it into 2 books. Have the mutiny be like the Empire Strikes Back, essentially.
Oh, we just had this great win in this one part of building our society, but then you suffer a loss in someone, like people getting kidnapped and there being a mutiny. I agree, Ike. I think that would have been. See, I'm curious. Like, I would love to pick his brain because there did seem to be a design on this part of the story only being 3 books,
Right.
and this is I mean, I have to go back to the beginning of this podcast where there is a larger collection of books called the Ember Verse. So this event happens and it sucks Nantucket back to 1250 BC. There is a whole other divergent series of books that explains what happens to the world in 1998 moving forward. And the event that transported Nantucket back in the present day completely it changes physics so that energy generation and the transfer of energy work differently, and it sets modern day back to the dark ages, and it wrecks the ability for us to use certain types of combustion and mechanics. So like guns don't work anymore even. It's really, really funky. But that series goes on, like I said, for like 18 books. And the Nantucket series isn't mentioned again until like you're 15 books in. And when you're 15 books in, they start having visions of an alternate history, a side timeline that involves the Nantucketers. So like Marion makes an appearance. It takes I'm not going to read 15 books to get back to where they were. And along the way, again, I'm sort of cribbing just because I only read the very first book of the Ember Verse. I didn't go down that rabbit hole. I did read all 3 books of the Nantucket series, but I mean, to me, that's huge. I mean, that the amount of planning and the amount of writing and just like that's prolific authoring, but it drives me a little crazy because I feel like the Nantucket series on its own could have been explored in a more satisfying way, and that we wouldn't have had to play this game with Emberverse and alien civilizations and alternate dimensions and sort of a new idea of magic as science, all kind of culminating into visions that characters in the Emberverse are having about characters from the Nantucket books. Because also, if you were reading the Emberverse books and you went 15 novels in, and then they were like, oh, and there's an African American woman with a sword in my vision, and you're like, what does that mean? Right. Where does that come from? What relevance does this have?
It's almost as obscure as some of the Star Trek crossovers.
Oh, it's like as I would say, as or more obscure, because that's hefty. So I have so much respect for an author that can kind of keep the threads of his plots in action for as long as he has. Like I said, Ember Verse is an impressive quantity of authoring, but it does leave me a little because I thought there were more books to the Nantucket series. I didn't realize that there is more Nantucket story. It just comes 15 books later in a completely not unrelated, but in a completely different series moving forward in time, where I kind of feel like the trilogy here could have had more meat to it all on its own. You didn't need to rely on the Emberverse, because that's the thing that I really like about the Nantucket trilogy is they never answer the event.
Right.
The event doesn't have a proper answer. What sucked us back in time doesn't matter. it happened and we're moving on, and this is the new future that we're creating. But it doesn't seem like he could completely stay away, because that's part of the metaphysics that's dealt with in Ember Verse.
And he's probably, you know, depending, I don't know the order in which every book came out, but I wouldn't be surprised if he came out with some of the Emberverse books and then he saw that he was maybe getting a little more sales on those. So then he's like, well, you know what, maybe I better just continue this series then. And so who knows? I do feel like the Emberverse is a little more of a marketable title for marketing than Island in the Sea of Time. So I don't know. It's interesting, and I really do want to get through these. I won't get through all of them at once, but I really am interested to see, just because the entire time I was reading this book, I'm just thinking, well, would I be able to do that? Like in some of the stuff where they're finding.
Let me because we've spent some time spoiling, not to spoil what happens, but your instincts about the exploration of Egypt and some of these other military campaigns, totally spot on. And from what I remember, I have not gone back to reread this whole trilogy, but there are some very satisfying, military moments as you go through this cat and mouse game of trying to find Walker. Some of that is really spot on. There's a character that's introduced in Island of the Sea of Time who's obsessed with ancient Egypt and Africa, because he wants to bring more modern technologies to Africa to prevent, like the slave trade and the way that Africa is exploited. And he doesn't understand that Northern Africa is very different than Southern Africa, especially in this time period, for the different populations of people and the different backgrounds of people. And he's very similar to some of the other characters too, that are like, well, we need to arm the Native Americans. You're like, well, why? Why would you do that? Right. And so he has the same designs on making Africa an empire that can defend itself too. It's some pretty heady stuff. I like that there is a lot of world traveling adventuring.
Me too. And I like how they leave the threads for, okay, we do have to go to Africa just to get coffee.
Yeah,
and it's really interesting too, like with what you were talking about with that one character who is obsessed with Egypt, and how they had to say to him, and they're quite correct in this when they're saying the Nubians. Well, there's also like the Magi, but like also the Nubians, who were historically the people who are far deeper into Africa, who Egypt would go and bully and steal their gold, and that's where they got all the gold from, was from the Nubians. And so it wasn't until at least 1,000 years. Many years later from this point, isn't until we start seeing some Nubian rulers, which is so it is interesting seeing kind of the naivete on Walker's side too. That was I don't know. That guy's kind of a wild card, it seems like.
I like that Walker preyed on that though. It's because he was able to recruit this other younger guy by saying like, oh yeah, and you want to go and arm Africa? Well, once we're over there in the British Isles, we'll be able to campaign and build up our resources, and I'll be able to send you off to make sure that our African brothers are well protected.
Right. Yeah.
I think a lot of that plays out well, and those little character, like I said, those little character moments, I think are very informed. They're very satisfying. But it is impressive to me because it seems like the most recent book for Ember Verse was just published in 2018.
Oh,
so
really?
These have been going strong since 1998. The first Ember trilogy started in 2004. Then there was a second Ember trilogy, which turned into sort of a Hitchhiker's Guide, where it turned into 6 books, not 6 books of a trilogy. And then there was another 5 series after that, which is kind of crazy.
That's man, dang it! Now I want to read all these.
You only have 19 more books to go, and a handful of short stories.
Oh man, I'll have to add that 19 books after I get done with the 20 books of the Master Commander series. Oh wait, oh god.
I love it. So, this to me, I am kind of filing under the heading of can't go home again.
Mm-hmm.
I liked this book. It was a bit more challenging to get through than I remember from when I read it the first time. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as I did on that first read, but there's enough in here, especially if you're a fan of fantasy and alternate histories. Like if you've ever read Orson Scott Card's Seventh Son series, my
Oh yeah.
family was really into like the first 3 books of that series. We really liked Seventh Son, and again, it's sort of an alternate history of colonial America with like magic, a very powerful magic influencing historical events. I think there's a lot to like about what they're doing here, about what SM Stirling is doing here for Island in the Sea of Time. I personally, I do not have it in me for a 20 book commitment. I'm just not going to be that guy, and I'm not going to get there.
For me, the one of the best realizations and epiphanies that I had thanks to this book was I understand Olmec's name now from Legends of the Hidden Temple. Or I finally, I was like, oh, makes sense.
I thought you were
now.
like building towards something genuine there. You dork.
But yeah, no, it was a lot of fun, and it was one of the more fun books where you get to you envision yourself as the characters, and it's kind of like it's in the same vein as kind of like Walking Dead, where you're like, am I going to be able to do that to survive that? And it's the same sort of itch that it scratches, even though it's very different kinds of peril.
Well, and while I feel like the plot transition moments rely on some dumb decision making, the actual problems that they face once they get to the problem, okay, so the plot motivators are usually oversights. We didn't pay attention to this. We missed this warning sign. But then when they're confronted with the problem, I like a Roddenberry-esque human. SM Stirling is writing a community of people that are working to their best possible versions of themselves and playing to their strengths. And so when bad things happen, it's not because they couldn't handle the challenge. It's a little bit more complicated than just like, oh well that failed.
Right.
These people are written very capably. That is why it is a bit frustrating when they overlook something. But that I've always liked that depiction. Again, it's like when you go to a horror film, you go and see a horror film, and like the movie can only exist because every single character makes exactly the wrong decision at every single opportunity when faced with a threat. Here, they overlook a problem, but then once they actually confront the problem, it's them operating to the best of their capabilities in each of those situations.
I will say there was one part of this book where I did cheer. I cheered at the book awkwardly in my living room. and it was the moment after they got away from the Olmecs. And the one surviving like mutineer guy who ended up capturing her and like getting them there. The woman who was captured is kind of in charge because the captain is indisposed at the time, and she just throws the guy overboard and just goes. And it's like, that was the smartest thing you've done the entire book up to now, was just get rid of the threat. So I was just like, I mean,
in a sort of like military sailor justicey kind of way. Like, well, we could bring you back to Nantucket, and they'll probably try and create some system of law and government that will give you a fair trial. Or I could just
She doesn't even kill him. She just pushes him overboard so he can die in the water. Like brutal. But
for how much trouble you've caused, appropriate.
How much trouble he's caused before and after having his hand violently amputated by one of our protagonists. So with a samurai sword. So it's I was like, thank God somebody has some sense. I I sound like a horrible, like I would be a horrible person. Don't ever trust me. Apparently, if we get trapped in,
Duly noted. I mean, as
1200
soon as we are
BC, I
sucked back in
guess
time 2,000 years, I will make sure
you're
to.
just like, hey Andrew,
Mm. Hey buddy, hey pal, bonk.
Yeah. Oh man, but yeah, you know what? And the other thing too is just that's the other thing. I wish they had gone a little bit more into the medical side of things.
Yeah,
with this too, because that's the other that's the big reason why if anyone's like, I'd love to live back in such and such time.
Wouldn't.
No, you don't. You do. The moment that you have a toothache.
That's what I was just gonna say. It's like I needed that chapter where someone needs a root canal.
Right. Yes. And they had to pull Tom Hanks with like the yeah, pretty much. And so and that was one thing. Scarcity of medical supplies was never really addressed, and that would be a major thing.
Yeah, I mean, and again, they pay it lip service, but it's still very convenient and very safe. Disease, infection, these things don't really seem to be that dangerous, which feels like sort of a 1990s perspective on we're all very comfortable here and we've got these great capabilities and this. I mean, you can have all this medical knowledge. You don't have a lab that can crank out antibiotics, then you don't really. We're not really that much more advanced. But again, I feel like we've done a very good job of convincing people not to read this book. But I do want to express that if there are different types of fantasy or especially like action sci-fi that you enjoy, there's a lot to like in what in where we go with
absolutely. Well, and so speaking of that, and speaking of
sorry, just real quick from the live chat from Philip Morales. If a book did include that, then the plot would end rather quickly with a leg infection.
Yes. Yes.
Oh it's no, like our main protagonist stepped on a nail. Oh, game over.
Think about all those caltrops are way more deadly than we thought. Yeah. Oh, I will say, I was like, oh, and like was like grabbing my foot a little bit whenever the way they portrayed the caltrops, the moment of realization. You're like, oh, that's horrifying. But yeah,
Steve DeRoach, we're doing this in hard mode.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's a really good one. I love the alternate history stuff, and it's way less. I accept this alternate history. There was another alternate history book I read like 15 years ago. I barely remember, but it essentially took place in the Civil War, and essentially it's if Robert E. Lee had an AK-47s, and it was stupid. I didn't get all the way through it, but this one, at least it's like believable how they approach everything, because like the premise of that other book wasn't even couldn't sustain itself because of the realities of the history.
I really like it. It's a little like World War Z, right? There's so much fun in the audience of the book imagining, well, what would I do? I think the best movies, the best survival movies do that really good job of putting you into that predicament in a way where you would question, like, well, what would I do? How would I deal with this? Where would I go for supplies? And there is so much structure of this book that I think handles that and handles it in a really fun way. Because yeah, again, it's like a video game. I need there to be a certain tier of realism, but I don't enjoy Red Dead Redemption 2 for making me watch the process of opening drawers. Because I don't watch my hand open a drawer and manually reach in and manipulate things. That's autopilot. My hand doesn't really exist when I go to open a drawer. So there's a certain tier of realism that's real. And then there's sort of a tier of realism that is actually less real.
Yeah, it's like Surgeon Simulator.
Yes. I mean, you've made it so exacting and granular. That's not actually how I interact with reality. That's not how I really do things. And Island in the Sea of Time is kind of video game real. Like we're going to mention that infections are dangerous, and we're going to talk about cannibals and crazy savage Native American populations. But really, it's like you get to the battle and you get to the climax, and then you can kind of just move on to the next stage, to the next mission. And that structure actually now makes a lot more sense in my brain. This is Super Nintendo era alternate history.
So on that topic of it being almost like a video game sort of history, it sounds like we're having something kind of similar and coming up for our next book.
Are you giving us the perfect segue for what we're going to be covering this next month?
It's possible.
I think you might be. Look at that.
It's and this is actually a book that you suggested that actually looks really interesting, and it's the history. Oh, sorry, or how about you give the intro?
No, please. The history of the future. You were doing such a great job of setting this up. I didn't actually want to step on it.
The history of the future, Oculus, Facebook, and the revolution that swept virtual reality. And this is something that I'm really interested to see, because I'm still not on board the virtual reality train yet.
Okay.
In terms of owning hardware and having a whole lot of time with it, but I love the infant, like the story of the infancy, because that's good, because it sets the market.
So we're gonna move away from fiction. This is only our second book dealing with actual history stuff, and Killer Angels was a wonderful, not fictionalized but dramatized version of the Civil War. So the history of the future, Oculus, Facebook, and the revolution that swept virtual reality is written by Blake J. Harris. Blake J. Harris he's only written 2 books, this book and Console Wars. And if you haven't read Console Wars, read both for when we come back to talk about history of the future. This is such a great voice. And I haven't read History of the Future yet. I'm only speaking on Console Wars here, where, you know how we love going back to explore the drama of like Steve Jobs versus Bill Gates. And you can make TV shows or you can make movies about these geeks that appeal broadly across entertainment. You know, you can make a movie about Steve Jobs and
the
people who
network.
But people who aren't super into technology will still enjoy a movie about Steve Jobs. Console Wars takes the showdown between Nintendo and Sega and does the same thing. It's like Bill Gates versus Steve Jobs. It's like any of these other sort of like more recent nerdy showdowns, conflicts, and it's such a great read. So I am very excited to see his exploration of the early days of this most recent phase of VR. Because VR obviously wasn't created when Facebook bought Oculus. There's a long history of trying to block out the world around you and create a completely virtual environment for someone to interact with. Again, I'm silly excited about this book because I like the way that he goes into details. He doesn't dumb this down for people who might not be savvy, but it's very accessible. It's written in a very accessible way. So like, this is a book I could give to, like my aunt who's really not into techie stuff. And I think she would just dig on the history of it, the time period of it, and the sort of the exploration of these concepts in a way that's obviously written by someone who is passionate about this stuff and really loves this stuff. So Aditya Anil, #flawless segue. He's giving you some props on your segue there. Philip Morales, that's why I love VR for realism. Even if the graphics aren't that great, it's because you are there. And oh my God, are you guys doing Ender's Game? I want to put Ender's Game on the list because I love Ender's Game. I don't necessarily love Orson Scott Card anymore, but well, Steve DeRoche making fun of us. It's not Ready Player One. We covered. We did do the Ready Player One book and movie comparison.
I do want to share a little a find that so my boss at my new job actually went in, and if you're on our follow us on Instagram and Twitter, you can see it. But she went through her brother gave her some of the old pocketbooks that they had, science fiction ones.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them was Star Wars Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Oh, and green screen is thinking this is all green, clear, but it's essentially it was written by Alan Dean Foster. And it was written before Empire Strikes Back as the sequel to Star Wars, the original Star Wars, if they never had another movie, which is just fascinating. And I'm sure has so much awkward sexual tension between Luke and Leia, which feels so awkward now. But
or maybe perfect for this like current phase of
maybe
Pornhub making everything incest porn. Maybe maybe that's what it's not Leia in a bikini. It's
Darth Vader, he's reaching for something, but it's not his lightsaber.
Oh,
boom! No,
but that's not the book we're going to be covering for this.
No, it's not. But it was an interesting find. So
no, I'm glad. You'll have to tell me again. It's always interesting to see like how much of a plan George Lucas really had versus what we eventually got to, and again through other people's influence over George Lucas too.
But we gotta have the laser sword, and it's really great when Yoda fights finally
funnier character than we've ever pulled off. And
like if we could have Jar Jar and Yoda fight together, that would be the greatest.
I think that's something that the kids would really enjoy.
We can't be Titanic, but we can still do good.
Sorry, yeah, no,
where is did Endgame officially beat Titanic? Is that where we're at now?
Probably. I mean, they've got the Infinity Stones. They could do whatever they want. But yeah. Oh man, it was good.
The GTA. No, this podcast took a sudden right turn.
Yes, it did.
Okay, so this last book, Island in the Sea of Time, I enjoyed it. You might not. There's definitely some structural issues there. Next month's book, History of the Future by Blake J. Harris. We'll have some links in our show notes and stuff so that you guys, if you want to get on board, we will probably be middle of June for the recording on that. I don't have an exact date yet, but I'll be coming back and recovering from Computex. So it'll likely be into the second week of June before we get to that. So you guys have time. You folks have time. Pick up this book because I think this is also going to be a really fun read. Exploring all of these concepts, my love of this notion of being able to plug in, obviously inspired by movies like The Matrix, but I was a huge William Gibson fan. And so this notion of making a consumer VR experience. We just saw the news on the Valve headset and $1,000 VR headset that's going to be coming by way of Valve. Some really exciting stuff. And also, I think we're now nearing a precipice where this is the time now to see if consumers are really going to jump into this VR world or if we're going to slow play it and miss our opportunities, or maybe augmented reality applications take over. So it could be some good stuff. We've got Steve DeRoche. Take a look at Lone Echo and also its multiplayer counterpart, Echo Arena. You might even see my name in the credits. Steve. All right. Some cool VR topics there. It's an Oculus VR exclusive. Let's see. And then Philip Morales, have your friend play that Sunset Zombie game and Beat Saber. Beat Saber.
I've seen.
It's so good.
I have a friend here who's my neighbor across the apartment parking lot that I sometimes go and we'll play some stuff in there. Beat Saber will be good since I'm standing still. Anything where I'm moving, I'm like, okay, we better have a bucket nearby in case I have to hurl. So.
Oh yeah, I've got a pretty weak stomach too, but there have been I like games like Super Hot didn't seem to bother me at all. I'm trying to remember what the name of. There's like a racing game, but you have to like swing your arms in a very specific way. And
that's
I can play that game for a while, and then because of the way that the tracks are all sort of hypercolor, I start to get a little rolfy at around the half-hour mark. But Beat Saber is the ultimate ambassador for virtual reality gaming. It is
That's
so
cool.
easy. It is so addictive. The live, die, repeat. You know, if you don't get through a mission, it's like it puts you right back in again. You start playing the song again. You learn from where you were. And that's the one. I just have a crappy little Windows mixed reality headset, and I'll take my laptop and this little headset. And I've had grandparents playing this game. I've had aunts and uncles playing this game. It is so good.
I'd say,
And people instantly get it. Why you would want to game like this. Like you just instantly understand why this is so much cooler than sitting in front of a display and holding a controller. Like,
oh yeah,
cutting things up with lightsabers, and it's awesome.
Well, and one thing I have, and I don't have actually the hat to kind of show it off, but one thing I played whenever I was using it was Elite Dangerous. And he has like my friend has like this crazy setup, and I have Elite Dangerous as well, but I use a system called Track IR, where you have the hat, and then you have the little reflectors and infrared sensor that'll track your head movements, but it's not quite the same. When you're in your ship, you can walk around just because you can look around and you can see the detail that they put in just areas that you can't see otherwise, and also unlike certain other ambitious, massive online multiplayer space sims. This one's actually a released game.
Right?
Yeah. So, but yeah, it is interesting for that. But it's like flight sims are kind of a niche one that have been this focus of VR stuff for a long time, and something like Beat Saber really is like the next. Feels like
really
the next
shakes
step.
it up. Although I'm really hoping I spent some time playing Project Cars just because I could plug in a VR headset for that. I really want to get I would love a modern day X-Wing or TIE fighter in VR.
Oh yeah. I'd love to see a mod. I'd love to see a mod for like X-Wing Alliance.
Yeah.
That does that. Like that would allow it. Because there's still a group of people who play X-Wing versus TIE Fighter and X-Wing Alliance and all those, and they're still modding those games today. All 12 of them. All 12 people.
It's real good. So even if you're maybe even I don't even know how I want to present this, but like VR isn't just like, crazy scary zombie games or something like that, like horror experiences that are very effective in VR because you lose sense of your corporeal form and you've got to like fight zombies. But you can share this like incredible virtual experience that takes you completely out of your own body with something as simple as Tetris. Tetris Effect on the PSVR is so good. It's ridiculous. Like that almost motivated me to get a PSVR all on its own. Like this $30 Tetris game, but then the music kicks in and you're completely enveloped in the space, and then just right in front of you is your Tetris window and you're just playing Tetris. But it's so much more than that, and it's so good.
Yeah, it's like it's like here's my thing with VR. I just want to if I could trade having to sit in a movie theater for 3 hours and wondering if I'm getting bed sores from the seats, I can just have it plugged in to my have the headset on. I can lay down on my bed and just watch it in a virtual theater. Glorious. It's just simple things in life for me,
Totally.
Yeah. So,
and Steve DeRoche, another Oculus VR exclusive I like is Rock Band VR. It's amazing what they did to get the game working in VR. The gameplay is really different from the original Guitar Hero Rock Band, and it's super underrated. And the second I saw Tetris Effect, the first game I thought of was Guitar Hero. To put you on stage, how awesome would that be?
Yeah.
And it's just a shame that we've sort of those types of games have somewhat fallen out of vogue, because I think they're all fresh. They're all ripe for revival.
Oh yeah.
In this VR space. But we should probably actually just start wrapping this up. I know
yeah.
Nikki B just jumped into the live chat, and unfortunately the show's over.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Nikki.
Sorry, Nikki B. We'll have more.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for checking it out. But yes, History of the Future. We just nerded out on VR for a while, so I think this is going to be a really fun read. That's going to be our book for May, and we'll be doing our June show So get the book ahead of time, give it a read, and then we can all have a fun chat in the live chat talking about some cool VR tech and nonfiction, some nonfiction for what we're going to be talking about. And yeah, in the meantime, you can go back through some of our past episodes, other books that we've read, that we've talked about. Some of the few, like Altered Carbon and Ready Player One, where we also did comparisons with the TV shows and the movies that these were based off of. And if you want to just join us for a chat, we have social media and email handles. Andrew, how might someone get in touch with us if they want to chat?
Well, if you want to get in touch with the Geek Book Club, you can follow us on Facebook. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter, all at the Geek Book Club. If you want to follow myself individually, you can follow me on the same platforms at Pat Produce, and also I'm on Twitch here and there occasionally. But that's pretty much where you can contact me. Also, if you have any questions for us or anything as well, and you don't want to use any, and you're not on any social media platform, you can also email us at thegeekbookclub@gmail.com.
And you can catch me. Sorry, I was replying to someone in the live chat. You can catch me across social media at SomeGadgetGuy on the Facebooks and the Instagrams and the Twitters and the Twitches. But you can join us back for another live show in June, probably the second week of June, where we will talk about history of the future. And I hope you'll join us for that. In the meantime, take care. Have fun reading some awesome books. Read some, even not the books that we're reading, just read some amazing books. And we'll catch you all on the next Geek Book Club. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing and clicking like buttons and subscribe buttons and all that other fun stuff too. So we'll catch you all next show.